Welcome to the Discourse Analyzer AI Toolkit, where articles come alive. You're listening to the audio version of our article. For the full text and an interactive experience, check out the link in the description below. Interact with any selection using our AI assistant to enhance your understanding. Let's explore.
Theories and Approaches of Ecocriticism in Discourse Analysis. Ecocriticism in discourse analysis encompasses a range of theories and approaches aimed at uncovering how language shapes our understanding of environmental issues. From critical discourse analysis, which examines power relations in environmental narratives, to frame analysis that explores the use of language and metaphors, each approach provides unique insights. Ecofeminism links feminist and ecological concerns, while political ecology delves into the political and economic aspects of environmental discourse. Additionally, environmental rhetoric, post-colonial ecocriticism, and Anthropocene discourse focus on how rhetoric, historical contexts, and human impact on the Earth influence environmental narratives. 1. Critical Discourse Analysis, CDA. Critical Discourse Analysis, CDA, is a significant theory and approach used in ecocriticism and discourse analysis to examine the ways power relations, ideologies, and societal structures shape environmental discourse. Rooted in a critical theory tradition, CDA aims to uncover hidden power dynamics embedded in language use. 1. Key principles of CDA in environmental discourse. Power and ideology. CDA focuses on revealing how language use reflects and perpetuates power structures and ideologies. In environmental discourse, this involves analyzing how influential groups, like governments or corporations, shape public understanding of environmental issues to align with their interests. Interdisciplinary approach. CDA draws from linguistics, sociology, and political science to understand how discourse influences social and political phenomena, including environmental policy and public attitudes. Contextual analysis. It emphasizes the importance of context in discourse analysis, recognizing that texts must be understood within their social, cultural, and political contexts. This is particularly important in environmental discourse, where context shapes the framing and perception of issues like climate change. Critical stance. CDA takes a critical stance towards discourse, questioning how language perpetuates inequality and injustice. In environmental discourse, this might involve analyzing how language marginalizes certain groups or downplays the severity of environmental issues. 2. Application in environmental discourse. Analyzing environmental narratives. CDA examines how environmental narratives are constructed and the ideologies they promote. This can include analyzing media coverage of environmental disasters or political rhetoric on climate policy. Examining framing and metaphors. It looks at how metaphors and framing in environmental discourse shape public perception and influence policy. For example, framing climate change as a crisis or a challenge has different implications for public engagement and policy responses. Uncovering hidden agendas. CDA aims to uncover hidden agendas in environmental discourse, such as how corporations may use greenwashing language to appear environmentally friendly while continuing harmful practices. Environmental justice. It critically analyzes how discourse can reflect and reinforce environmental injustice, revealing how marginalized communities are often left out of environmental conversations or are disproportionately affected by environmental degradation. 3. Importance in ecocriticism. Understanding power dynamics. CDA helps reveal how power dynamics shape environmental discourse, showing how language can reinforce or challenge existing power structures. Promoting equitable discourse. By uncovering biases and inequalities in environmental discourse, CDA aims to promote more equitable and inclusive discussions around environmental issues. Informing policy and advocacy. Insights from CDA can inform environmental policy and advocacy, providing a deeper understanding of how language influences public attitudes and political decisions. In summary, critical discourse analysis is a crucial approach in ecocriticism and discourse analysis, offering tools to critically examine how language shapes environmental understanding and reflects power relations and ideologies. 2. Ecofeminism. Ecofeminism is a theoretical approach that links feminist and ecological concerns, emphasizing the connections between the exploitation of the environment and the oppression of women. In Discourse Analysis, Ecofeminism examines how gendered language and narratives influence our understanding of environmental issues and contribute to environmental degradation. 1. Key principles of ecofeminism. Connection between oppression. Ecofeminism draws connections between the domination of nature and the subjugation of women, arguing that both forms of oppression arise from patriarchal ideologies. Gendered language and nature. Ecofeminism analyzes how language reflects and reinforces the gendering of nature. Terms like Mother Earth or virgin forest reveal how nature is often feminized and then controlled, mirroring the treatment of women in patriarchal societies. Interconnectedness. Ecofeminism emphasizes the interconnectedness of all forms of life, advocating for a holistic approach to addressing social and environmental issues. Valuing marginalized voices. This approach prioritizes the voices and knowledge of marginalized groups, including women, indigenous peoples, and others traditionally excluded from environmental discourse. 2. Application in discourse analysis. Analyzing gendered metaphors. Ecofeminism examines how metaphors used to describe nature reflect gender biases. For example, depicting nature as a nurturing mother or a chaotic, wild woman can influence perceptions of environmental issues and justify control over nature. Environmental justice. Ecofeminism analyzes environmental justice from a gendered perspective, showing how environmental degradation often disproportionately impacts women and other marginalized groups. Critiquing policy and media discourse. It critiques policy and media discourse for reinforcing patriarchal and anthropocentric attitudes that harm both women and the environment. Exploring alternative narratives. Ecofeminism advocates for alternative narratives that challenge patriarchal structures and promote egalitarian relationships between humans and nature. 3. Importance in ecocriticism and discourse analysis. Revealing hidden biases. Ecofeminism uncovers the gender biases in environmental discourse, showing how language can perpetuate harmful attitudes towards both women and the environment. Promoting inclusive environmentalism. By highlighting the connections between various forms of oppression, ecofeminism advocates for more inclusive and intersectional approaches to environmentalism. Challenging dominant narratives. It challenges dominant narratives that justify the exploitation of nature and marginalized communities, advocating for narratives that promote equality and sustainability. Influencing policy and advocacy. Ecofeminism informs policy and advocacy by promoting gender equality and ecological sustainability, encouraging a shift in how society addresses environmental challenges. In summary, ecofeminism is a crucial theoretical approach in ecocriticism and discourse analysis that reveals the intersections between gender and environmental issues. It provides insights into how gendered language shapes environmental narratives and advocates for more inclusive and equitable approaches to environmentalism. 3. Frame analysis. Frame analysis is a critical approach in ecocriticism and discourse analysis that examines how language and metaphors shape the framing of environmental issues. Frames are mental structures that influence how we perceive the world, and in the context of environmental discourse, they play a crucial role in shaping public perception and understanding of ecological challenges. 1. Key principles of frame analysis. Framing and perception. Frames influence how individuals interpret information. The way environmental issues are framed in language can determine whether they are seen as urgent, manageable, or insignificant. Metaphors and framing. Metaphors are a central element of framing. They help shape how people think about environmental issues by comparing them to more familiar concepts, such as describing the planet as a spacecraft with finite resources. Framing devices. These are linguistic tools, including metaphors, stories, catchphrases, and images, that guide how information is presented. They influence the way audiences perceive environmental issues. Contextual framing. The context in which environmental issues are discussed can significantly impact framing. For instance, framing climate change within the context of national security can evoke different responses compared to framing it in a humanitarian context. 2. Application in environmental discourse. Analyzing media discourse. Frame analysis examines how media organizations frame environmental issues, revealing biases and priorities in news coverage. For example, Whether climate change is framed as a political issue or a scientific reality can influence public perception. Political framing. It looks at how politicians frame environmental policies to gain support or opposition. The language used in political discourse can significantly influence how the public understands and reacts to environmental policies. Metaphor analysis. Frame analysis investigates how metaphors shape understanding. For instance, the metaphor, war on climate change, can imply the need for aggressive action, while green economy suggests economic opportunity through sustainability. Social movements and advocacy. Social movements and environmental advocacy groups use framing to mobilize support. Understanding these frames can reveal how narratives are constructed to promote particular environmental agendas. 3. Importance in ecocriticism and discourse analysis. Influencing policy and action. Frame analysis reveals how framing impacts environmental policy and public action. The way issues are framed can lead to different policy outcomes and levels of public engagement. Uncovering ideologies and biases. Frames can reflect underlying ideologies and biases in environmental discourse, revealing the power dynamics and interests shaping these narratives. Crafting effective communication. Understanding frames helps in crafting effective environmental communication. Choosing the right frame can help advocate for sustainable policies and practices. Analyzing narrative power. Frame analysis provides insights into how narratives around environmental issues are constructed, maintained, and challenged, which is crucial for understanding societal attitudes and responses. In summary, frame analysis in ecocriticism and discourse analysis provides a valuable tool for understanding how language and metaphors shape public perception and policy regarding environmental issues. By uncovering the framing devices in narratives used in environmental discourse, it offers insights into the complex ways language influences our relationship with the natural world. 4. Political ecology. Political ecology is a theoretical approach within ecocriticism and discourse analysis that explores the political, economic, and social factors influencing environmental discourse. It emphasizes how power dynamics, economic interests, and political agendas shape how environmental issues are framed, understood, and acted upon. 1. Key principles of political ecology. Power dynamics and governance. Political ecology examines how power relations at various levels, from local to global, shape environmental policies and discourse. It highlights how governance structures and political interests influence environmental decision-making. Economic factors and resource distribution. The approach analyzes how economic interests impact resource distribution and environmental management. It investigates how economic inequality and corporate influence affect environmental outcomes and narratives. Environmental justice. A core aspect of political ecology is the focus on environmental justice. It examines how marginalized communities often bear the brunt of environmental degradation and are excluded from decision-making processes. Interdisciplinary approach. Political ecology is interdisciplinary, drawing from geography, anthropology, sociology, and political science. This allows for a comprehensive analysis of the complex interplay between society and the environment. 2. Application in discourse analysis. Analyzing environmental policy. Political ecology examines how political interests influence environmental policies and the language used to justify them. For instance, it might analyze how political rhetoric about energy independence justifies controversial projects like oil drilling. Media discourse and corporate influence. It investigates how corporate interests shape media discourse on environmental issues. For example, analyzing how media owned by fossil fuel companies frames climate change can reveal biases in reporting. Environmental justice narratives. Political ecology analyzes narratives around environmental justice, revealing how language reflects and reinforces inequalities in how different communities experience environmental issues. Development and conservation discourses. It critically examines how discourses on development and conservation can justify environmental degradation or reinforce inequalities, such as through the concept of sustainable development. 3. Importance in ecocriticism and discourse analysis. Revealing structural inequities. Political ecology uncovers structural inequities in environmental discourse, showing how power and economic interests shape narratives and policies that often disadvantage marginalized groups. Critical analysis of policies and narratives. It provides a framework for critically analyzing environmental policies and narratives, revealing whose interests are served and whose voices are marginalized. Influencing advocacy and policy. Insights from political ecology inform advocacy and policy, helping develop more just and equitable approaches to environmental challenges. Promoting environmental justice. By highlighting issues of environmental justice, political ecology advocates for inclusive discourse that recognizes the rights and needs of all communities in environmental decision-making. In summary, political ecology in ecocriticism and discourse analysis offers a powerful lens for understanding how political, economic, and social factors shape environmental discourse. It emphasizes the importance of equity and justice in environmental narratives and policies, highlighting the need to consider power dynamics in addressing ecological challenges. 5. Environmental rhetoric. Environmental rhetoric is a significant approach in ecocriticism and discourse analysis that examines how language is used to shape and influence public attitudes and behaviors toward the environment. This involves analyzing the rhetorical techniques employed in texts to understand how they persuade audiences regarding environmental issues. 1. Key principles of environmental rhetoric. Persuasion and argumentation. Environmental rhetoric focuses on how arguments are constructed to persuade audiences about environmental issues. It analyzes logical appeals, logos, emotional appeals, pathos, and ethical appeals, ethos. Metaphor and imagery. Metaphors and imagery are central to environmental rhetoric, shaping how people perceive and understand complex environmental issues. For example, referring to the planet as a lifeboat evokes urgency and limited capacity. Narrative and framing. The narratives used in environmental discourse significantly impact how issues are framed. Stories about environmental crises, for instance, can evoke emotions and influence public perceptions of urgency and agency. Ethos and credibility. Establishing credibility, ethos, is crucial in environmental rhetoric. This involves building trust through authoritative sources, scientific evidence, or moral positioning, influencing how messages are received. 2. Application in discourse analysis. Analyzing environmental campaigns. Environmental rhetoric is used to study the strategies employed in environmental campaigns, such as the choice of language to evoke emotions and motivate action. Media and political discourse. Analyzing how media and political discourse use rhetorical techniques to frame environmental issues, such as climate change, reveals biases and influences on public perception. Metaphor analysis. By studying metaphors, environmental rhetoric explores how specific language choices influence understanding, like the impact of metaphors such as carbon footprint on individual responsibility for emissions. Narrative construction. It looks at how narratives are constructed around environmental issues, like the heroism in conservation stories or the apocalypse in climate change narratives. 3. Importance in ecocriticism and discourse analysis. Influencing public perception. Understanding environmental rhetoric helps reveal how language influences public perception, which is crucial for effective communication about environmental challenges. Shaping policy and advocacy. Insights from environmental rhetoric can guide the creation of effective environmental policies and advocacy campaigns by revealing what language resonates with audiences. Critically analyzing environmental messages. It provides tools for critically analyzing environmental messages, revealing the intentions behind them and their potential impact on behavior and policy. Crafting effective environmental communication. Understanding rhetorical strategies allows communicators to craft messages that effectively promote environmental sustainability and influence behavior. In summary, environmental rhetoric in ecocriticism and discourse analysis focuses on how language persuades and influences public attitudes toward the environment. By analyzing techniques like metaphor, imagery, and narrative, it provides valuable insights into how environmental messages are constructed and received, shaping discourse on ecological issues. 6. Postcolonial ecocriticism. Postcolonial ecocriticism is an approach in ecocriticism that explores the intersections between colonialism, imperialism, and environmental degradation. It seeks to understand how historical and ongoing colonial practices have contributed to environmental issues and how marginalized communities are disproportionately affected by them. By combining insights from post-colonial theory and eco-criticism, this approach provides a critical framework for understanding the power dynamics at play in environmental discourse. 1. Key principles of post-colonial eco-criticism. Colonial legacies. It examines how colonial legacies have shaped contemporary environmental issues. This includes the exploitation of natural resources, land dispossession, and the imposition of Western environmental norms on colonized regions. Environmental justice. Post-colonial eco-criticism emphasizes environmental justice, focusing on how marginalized communities, especially in post-colonial societies, are disproportionately affected by environmental degradation and lack access to environmental decision-making. Interconnected oppressions. It explores the interconnectedness of environmental degradation and social oppression. The exploitation of nature and people often went hand in hand under colonialism, with indigenous lands being exploited for resources. Subaltern voices and knowledge. It prioritizes the voices and knowledge of marginalized communities, challenging the dominance of Western environmental narratives and advocating for more inclusive environmental discourse. 2. Application in discourse analysis. Analyzing environmental narratives. Post-colonial eco-criticism analyzes environmental narratives to reveal how colonial ideologies and power dynamics persist in contemporary discourse. This includes how narratives justify or oppose environmental exploitation. Media and policy discourse. It examines how media and policy discourse often marginalize or ignore the perspectives of post-colonial societies, emphasizing the importance of including these voices in discussions about global environmental challenges. Representation of nature. It studies how different cultures represent nature in literature and media, revealing how colonial attitudes have influenced these representations and affected how we understand environmental issues. Global environmental governance. Post-colonial eco-criticism critically analyzes international environmental policies, treaties, and discussions, highlighting how they often reflect the interests of more developed nations over those of marginalized communities. 3. Importance in eco-criticism and discourse analysis. Revealing colonial impact on the environment. It uncovers the historical impact of colonialism on environmental degradation, showing how colonial practices have led to ecological crises. Highlighting environmental justice issues. Post-colonial eco-criticism emphasizes the importance of environmental justice, revealing how marginalized communities are disproportionately affected by environmental challenges. Critiquing dominant narratives. It critiques dominant environmental narratives that often ignore or undermine the experiences and knowledge of marginalized communities. Advocating for inclusive discourse. This approach advocates for more inclusive discourse in environmental discussions, emphasizing the need to recognize and respect diverse perspectives. In summary, post-colonial eco-criticism in discourse analysis examines the intersections of colonialism, imperialism, and environmental degradation. It provides a framework for understanding the historical and ongoing power dynamics in environmental discourse, highlighting the importance of environmental justice and the inclusion of marginalized voices. 7. Anthropocene Discourse. Anthropocene discourse focuses on how the concept of the Anthropocene, a proposed geological epoch marked by significant human impact on the Earth, is constructed, interpreted, and debated in different discourses. This analysis is crucial as the Anthropocene challenges traditional distinctions between nature and culture, highlighting the extent of human influence on planetary systems. 1. Key principles of Anthropocene discourse. Human impact and responsibility. It examines how the Anthropocene frames humanity's role in environmental change, emphasizing the ethical implications of our collective impact on the planet. Temporal and geological shifts. Anthropocene discourse explores the conceptual shift from thinking of geological time as beyond human influence to recognizing humanity's role in shaping planetary systems. Contested definitions and debates. There are varied interpretations and debates surrounding the Anthropocene, including when it started, its defining characteristics, and its implications for future environmental policies. Cultural narratives and representations. This discourse analyzes how the Anthropocene is represented in cultural narratives, media, and literature, reflecting and shaping societal attitudes toward human-environment relations. 2. Application in Discourse Analysis. Scientific and Policy Discourse. It examines how scientists, policymakers, and international organizations construct the concept of the Anthropocene in their discussions, influencing how global environmental challenges are perceived and addressed. Media representations. The analysis of media representations of the Anthropocene reveals how mass media frames the human impact on the environment, affecting public perception and policy debates. Cultural and literary narratives. Analyzing how literature and popular culture depict the Anthropocene provides insights into how society grapples with the ethical and existential implications of human-induced environmental change. Philosophical and ethical implications. Anthropocene discourse delves into philosophical debates around humanity's ethical responsibilities and how this epoch redefines humanity's relationship with nature. 3. Importance in ecocriticism and discourse analysis. Shaping environmental policy. By understanding how the Anthropocene is constructed in policy discourse, we can better grasp its influence on international environmental strategies and agreements. Informing public understanding. The way the Anthropocene is framed in media and cultural discourse informs public understanding, highlighting the need for effective communication about humanity's environmental impact. Challenging existing narratives. Anthropocene discourse challenges traditional narratives of environmental change, urging us to reconsider the dichotomy between humans and nature and recognize our collective influence. Influencing environmental ethics. Understanding the Anthropocene's philosophical implications helps shape a new environmental ethic that recognizes humanity's role in shaping the planet's future. In summary, the discourse surrounding the Anthropocene provides a valuable framework for understanding how humanity's unprecedented impact on the Earth is perceived, debated, and addressed across various fields. It challenges existing narratives, emphasizing the urgency of developing new ways of thinking about our relationship with the planet. Conclusion. The diverse approaches in ecocriticism offer comprehensive insights into the complex ways language influences our perception of environmental issues. By examining power dynamics, gendered language, political contexts, and the framing of environmental narratives, these theories reveal the underlying ideologies that shape discourse. Such analysis is crucial for understanding and addressing the environmental challenges of our time, as it brings to light the narratives that guide public perception and policy. Frequently asked questions. What is critical discourse analysis, CDA, in the context of ecocriticism? Critical discourse analysis, CDA, examines how power relations and ideologies shape environmental discourse. It analyzes language to reveal how dominant groups influence environmental narratives, often reflecting economic and political interests that shape public understanding and policy. How does ecofeminism relate to environmental discourse? Ecofeminism links feminist and ecological concerns, analyzing how gendered language influences environmental narratives. It critiques the exploitation of both women and nature, emphasizing the interconnectedness of social and ecological justice. What does frame analysis investigate in environmental discourse? Frame analysis investigates how language and metaphors frame environmental issues. It examines how specific language choices influence perception, highlighting the power of framing in shaping public attitudes towards environmental challenges. What does political ecology focus on in environmental discourse? Political ecology examines the political and economic factors that shape environmental discourse. It often focuses on resource distribution, environmental justice, and how global politics impact local ecological issues. What is environmental rhetoric? Environmental rhetoric explores how language is used to persuade or influence attitudes and behaviors towards the environment. It involves analyzing techniques like metaphor, imagery, and narrative to understand how environmental messages are constructed and delivered. How does postcolonial ecocriticism address environmental issues? Postcolonial ecocriticism examines the intersections of colonialism, imperialism, and environmental degradation. It often highlights how marginalized communities are disproportionately affected by environmental issues, critiquing how colonial legacies continue to influence environmental policies and perceptions. What does Anthropocene discourse analyze? Anthropocene discourse analyzes how the concept of the Anthropocene, characterized by human impact on Earth, is constructed and debated in various discourses. It explores how this concept shapes discussions about environmental responsibility and the future of the planet. How does CDA reveal power dynamics in environmental narratives? CDA reveals power dynamics by analyzing how language reflects and reinforces power relations in environmental narratives. It uncovers biases and ideologies that influence public understanding of environmental issues, often favoring dominant political and economic interests. How does ecofeminism critique traditional environmental narratives? Ecofeminism critiques traditional environmental narratives by challenging the gender biases in language that justify the exploitation of both women and nature. It calls for narratives that promote both gender equality and ecological sustainability. Why is frame analysis important in understanding environmental discourse? Frame analysis is important because it reveals how specific language and metaphors shape public perception of environmental issues. Understanding these frames helps identify the underlying assumptions and biases in environmental discourse. How does political ecology differ from other approaches in eco-criticism? Political ecology differs from other approaches by emphasizing the political and economic contexts that shape environmental discourse. It focuses on how global power structures influence local ecological issues, often highlighting issues of resource distribution and justice. What techniques are commonly studied in environmental rhetoric? Common techniques in environmental rhetoric include the use of metaphor, imagery, and narrative. These techniques shape how environmental messages are conveyed, influencing public attitudes and behaviors toward the environment. How does postcolonial eco-criticism inform environmental justice? Postcolonial eco-criticism informs environmental justice by revealing how historical colonialism and imperialism have led to environmental degradation that disproportionately affects marginalized communities. It calls for policies that address these historical injustices. Why is Anthropocene discourse significant in environmental discussions? Anthropocene discourse is significant because it frames the discussion about humanity's impact on the Earth. It influences how we perceive our role in environmental degradation and informs debates on sustainability and planetary stewardship. How can frame analysis and environmental rhetoric complement each other? Frame analysis and environmental rhetoric complement each other by examining both the language and the persuasive techniques used in environmental discourse. Together, they provide insights into how framing and rhetoric shape public perception and influence environmental behavior.